The year 1941. Nazi Germany, led by Hitler, had taken over Western Europe and the Balkans. In the shadow of ongoing air wars over Europe, Adolf Hitler wanted to open a new front in the Second World War, the Eastern Front. Hitler's dream was to settle the superior German race in the new lands, to be carried in Soviet Russia, exile most of the existing Russian inhabitants to Siberia, and to employ the rest as workers for the Germans. In this way, by combining German technology with rich oil fields, he will destroy England from the air and make them forget their aerial defeat against England in 1940. Another reason Hitler hated Soviets was that he believed the Jews had been brought to power with the Bolshevik Revolution. According to Hitler, the Russians were helpless, inferior people who made the Jews rule. Before the end of the operations in the Balkans, the Germans began massing troops on the Soviet border, and in March, 6,800,000 mixed Axis powers were deployed to the Romanian-Soviet border. After the end of the Balkan campaign, Hitler secretly deployed more than 3 million German soldiers to the Soviet border areas. In addition, Nazi planes were flying over Soviet territory, performing frontline surveillance. Though the Soviet command became concerned by recognizing Nazi activity, Stalin believed that the Nazis were unlikely to attack them, delayed Soviet preparation. Despite Stalin's opinion, Marshal Semyon Timoshenko, together with the Chief of Staff of the Red Army, Boris Shaposhnikov, prepared a defense plan against a possible German invasion. According to this plan, the possible German attack would extend from the Arctic city of Arkhangelsk via Gorky and Rostov to the port city of Arkhangelsk at the tip of the Volga. The predictions of two Soviet generals would be almost 100% correct. If we go back to the German front, the Nazi command started to prepare a large force for the operation they named Barbarossa. A force of 3,800,000 soldiers, including the Northern Army, the Central Army, and the Southern Army, was prepared for war. This land force would be accompanied by 6,867 armored vehicles, including 3,795 tanks, 4,389 aircraft, 23,435 artillery batteries, mortar shells, approximately 600,000 motor vehicles, and 700,000 horses. All of these were deployed ready to operate along a front stretching from the Arctic Ocean south to the Black Sea. If we look at the Soviet front, although they were unprepared for the attack, in addition to approximately 5,774,000 soldiers, consisting of 230 division stations on the border, 39,000 artillery batteries and mortars, 3,000 armored vehicles, 25,700 tanks, and 18,700 aircraft were ready for the battle. It was only a matter of time before the storm broke out between the Nazis and the Soviet Union. At about 11 p.m. on 21st June 1941, an emergency call was sent to the Soviet divisions in the border area. In this order, it was written that all armed forces should be prepared for war, but all kinds of provocative actions should be avoided. A short time later, Alfred Lisko, a Nazi deserter, crossed the Soviet border at around 2 a.m. on 22nd June and informed the Soviet side that the Nazis would launch an attack. Although this information was passed on to Stalin, he considered it disinformation. Insisting that Hitler would not attack him before the first bomb fell, Stalin was only convinced when the Nazis began bombing Soviet-occupied Poland at around 3:15 a.m. on the night of June 22, 1941. After Poland, the Nazi army, which started to bomb the Soviet defenses on all other fronts, officially began to invade the Soviet Union. Parallel to the artillery fire, Nazi planes began to bomb Leningrad, Bessarabia, and Crimea. At about 7 a.m., the Wehrmacht ordered about 3 million soldiers to advance, and these Axis powers, crossing the border, began to destroy the Red Army, which they had caught by surprise. Finnish and Romanian troops accompanying the Nazi forces during the first invasion began their advance at the same time. At 10:30 a.m. on June 23rd, the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels announced the invasion through Hitler's mouth in a radio broadcast. "We are currently carrying out the biggest offense in the world. Today I have decided to put a fate and the future of Reich and our people in the hands of our soldiers. Within 3 months, we'll witness an unprecedented Russian collapse in history. God help us, especially in this war." The few Soviet soldiers against the advancing German tanks could do nothing but retreat. At 7:15 a.m. on June 23rd, Stalin ordered the Soviet army to retaliate against the Axis powers where they had breached the borders and launch airstrikes on the border areas. Around 9:15 a.m., he changed this order and issued a general attack order against the Germans on all fronts regardless of the borders. Stalin's delay in giving this order was because he believed the attack had been launched without Hitler's permission. Many Soviet settlements fell into the hands of Nazis, as it took several days for Stalin to realize the enormity of the disaster. At around 12 noon, the news of the invasion was announced to the public by the Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov as follows: "Without declaring war, German forces attacked our territory, crossing our border in many places. The Red Army and all the Soviet people will wage a victorious patriotic war for our beloved homeland, for honor, for freedom. Our cause is justified. The enemy will be defeated. Victory will be ours." The activity that began on Soviet front was immediately noticed by the Luftwaffe reconnaissance units. As a result of the intense air attacks, the supply depots and airports on the borderline of this Red Army were destroyed one by one. As a result of this attack, the Soviet Army lost 3,922 warplanes and 2 airfields in the first 3 days of the war. Returning to the ground attacks, on 22nd June, Army Group North attacked the Soviet Northwest Front, breaking through the Soviet lines. Having captured Lithuania and Latvia in 3 days, the German forces captured the first target, Pskov, 250 km from Leningrad, on the 7th day of the attack. As for Army Group Center, it was difficult to advance due to the fact that the Soviet forces were the most crowded front, the Pripyat marshes and the Carpathian Mountains. On the night of June 23rd, Soviet tanks launched an attack on German forces from both the north and the south. However, due to the poor coordination, the tanks which were sent piecemeal were quickly destroyed by the German panzers. On 26th of June, the Soviet tanks once again attacked from the same spot, but this time in a more organized fashion, but the result didn't change. After 4 days of hard fighting, the Soviets, who lost 800 tanks, retreated to the Stalin Line in Kiev. In the Southern Army, however, things went exactly as the Germans wanted. The German army, which started to advance on 22nd of June, together with the Romanian forces, easily pushed the small number of Soviet forces. By July 2nd, important cities such as Lviv, Vinnytsia and Chernivtsi fell into the hands of the Germans. Rainstorms that began in Belarus and Ukraine in early July slowed the advance of German panzers. For this reason, the German 7-day break from the offense was an opportunity for the Soviet defense to regroup. Reinforced along the Stalin's defensive line built in the 1920s, the Soviet army counterattacked the Germans on the 6th of July. However, the German Air Force easily thwarted the counterattack with tank destroyers. On the northern front, the 2nd and 3rd German panzer units were advancing rapidly towards Smolensk, a strategically important city before Moscow. By the 10th of July, the 2nd Panzer Group had penetrated from the south and the 3rd Panzer Group from the north near the city. 3 Soviet divisions between these 2 tank units were destroyed after 6 days of fighting, and the city was captured on the 16th of July. Now there were only 360 kilometers left for the Nazi boots to enter Moscow, the heart of Stalin. However, it soon became clear that capturing Moscow was not easy at all. In the area between Smolensk and Moscow, a wall of flash was built by Soviet soldiers. The Axis powers, which made many attempts to break through this wall, had to retreat with heavy casualties each time. A month had passed since the start of the war, and the Germans realized that they had grossly underestimated Soviet power. Operations were paused, both to allow for resupply and to provide reinforcements. Meanwhile, Hitler held a meeting with his staff. At this meeting, the general commander of the land forces, General Franz Halder, the commander of Army Group Center Fedor von Bock, and almost all the German generals participating in the operation, expressed their views in favor of the continuation of the all-out advance towards Moscow. The generals pointed out that besides the psychological significance of the capture of Moscow, it was an important weapons production center. Panzer Commander Heinz Guderian, an eminent general, also expressed his opinion in favor of continuing the offensive against Moscow. However, Hitler ordered Guderian to direct his tanks north and south, stopping the attack on Moscow. The German armies, which started implementing this order, managed to capture Odessa and Dnipro in the south and Estonia in the north until September 1st. By September, the 4th Panzer Group was ordered to seize Leningrad and enter within 48 kilometers of the city. The Finnish army, on the other hand, moved south from both sides of Lake Ladoga and captured a small piece of Soviet territory. Meanwhile, 400,000 Soviet citizens living in the city of Leningrad tried to build walls to defend the city, while 160,000 voluntarily joined the Red Army. On 7th of September, the German 20th Sumato Division captured Schlüsselburg, cutting off all the highways from Leningrad. Army Group North, which started to advance again on 9th of September, captured areas up to 10 km from the city center by September 19. However, after that, the Germans, whose progress was stopped due to the Soviet attacks, ended the attack as their casualties increased. Enraged by the situation and out of patience, Hitler ordered that Leningrad not be attacked, but instead a blockade of Leningrad in order to ensure that the people surrendered to starvation. In line with this, Leningrad and its people were isolated from both land and sea as of September 22, 1941. This unsuccessful attack on Leningrad so hurt Hitler's pride that he once again turned towards Moscow to take revenge. But before an attack on Moscow could begin, operations in Kiev had to be ended. About 800,000 Soviet soldiers defended Kiev, a strategically important city. The German forces, which entered the city from 3 branches, completely surrounded the city. After 10 days of fierce fighting in which tanks, artillery and planes were heavily used, the city fell on 26th of September. While approximately 200,000 Soviet soldiers lost their lives in the Kiev War, 220,000 soldiers were captured by the Germans. After this war, the Red Army lost its numerical superiority over the Germans. Therefore, Stalin was able to gather only 800,000 soldiers to defend Moscow. On September 30, 1941, the Germans launched the Typhoon operation to capture Moscow. In front of the Germans were 2 defensive lines, one in Vyazma and one in Mozhaisk, to reach Moscow. Russian peasants burned their crops, houses and barns and drove their cattle and horses against German army in order to stop the advancing German troops. The main purpose was to destroy the supplies and foodstuffs needed by the Nazi army. German panzer units attacked Vyazma on the first day of the operation, shattering the Soviet first line of defense. As a result of this shocking attack, 200,000 Soviet soldiers died and more than 500,000 were captured. Now the Red Army had only 90,000 soldiers and 150 tanks left to defend Moscow. When the situation was at its most hopeless, the weather suddenly deteriorated, it started to rain, and the temperatures suddenly dropped. This turned the unpaved roads into mud and slowed the German advance into Moscow. In mid-October, snow fell, then rain again, and the ground was so sticky that the German tanks could not advance. However, unlike the German tanks, the T-34 Soviet tanks could easily move through the mud. This caused German panzers to be easily hunted by the T-34s. Bad weather also caused disruptions in the German supply chain. That's why on October 31, the German army decided to stop Operation Typhoon. During this pause, the Red Army units further consolidated their position, providing 200,000 soldiers, more than 1,000 tanks, and 1,200 aircraft support to defend Moscow. With the ground hardening due to the cold weather, the Germans resumed offense against Moscow on 15th of November. Although the troops were now able to advance again, there was no improvement in the supply situation. Against the Germans was a Soviet army that defended harder than the one they had left. Lacking sufficient fuel and ammunition, the German army advanced within 8 kilometers of Moscow on 2nd of December. Now they were so close to Moscow that they could even see the towers of Kremlin from their positions. But worsening weather conditions once again began to push the Germans. Dense fog also hindered the Luftwaffe's large-scale air operations. Deprived of air support and unaccustomed to winter warfare, the German army slowly began to disintegrate. As a matter of fact, they repulsed 250 kilometers from Moscow until January 1942, during the Soviet counter-offensive that started on 5th of December. On January 7, 1942, Hitler decided to stop the Typhoon operation. The Wehrmacht had lost the Battle of Moscow, didn't get exactly what it wanted, and lost more than 830,000 soldiers. Hitler would soon inform his army of his new targets, Stalingrad. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.